Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The scent hit first, even before the engine cooled. Not the damp decay one anticipates from a house left hollow for 2 years, but something alkaline, abrasive, like rain on pavement mixed with the tang of tarnished copper. I lingered in the car, the ignition silent, my gaze tracing the leprous peel of white paint on the old Victorian, the weary slump of its gutters. The solicitor's voice echoed crisp and detached. Simply prepare it for market, a week, perhaps 2 at most. A bitter laugh escaped me, as if 5 years it had been since I'd last laid eyes on Uncle Silas. Before his vanishing act, that is. After Aunt Clara's passing, he'd retreated into himself, burrowing deep within this rambling structure on the town's fringe. Now this mausoleum was mine, bequeathed along with the accumulated detritus of his solitude. The inheritance naturally came knotted with conditions. Ready the place for sale personally or relinquish it entirely. A posthumous lesson in responsibility, I supposed. Vintage Silas. The key protested in the lock, a rusty groan against aged brass. It took a solid shove of my shoulder to breach the threshold. Inside, the atmosphere was stagnant, heavy as velvet. Sunlight strained through panes filmed with grime, illuminated swirling constellations of dust. Furniture huddled beneath jaundiced shrouds, spectral shapes arrested mid-gesture. Ubiquitous coffee mugs stained with the fossilized rings of countless brews littered every available surface. A leaning tower of newspapers near the sofa bore dates from the bleak heart of 2022. That initial day blurred into a campaign of forced ventilation and refuse disposal. The kitchen proved the nadir. The refrigerator's contents had achieved a state of semi-sentient liquefaction that threatened my gag reflex. Yet progress unfolded. As twilight bled through the newly opened windows, 6 industrial-sized bags slumped by the curb, testament to my labor, revealing glimpses of forgotten countertop beneath the grime. It was then, surveying the upper landing from the base of the stairs, that I truly registered the attic door. Tucked away at the hallway's terminus, its mere presence radiated a peculiar chill, a prickle across the skin. Absurd, I chided myself. It was wood and paint, nothing more. Yet each subsequent passage near that corridor tightened my chest, slicked my palms with anxious sweat. I began instinctively navigating the house via longer routes, skirting the hallway's pull. Sleep found me on the downstairs sofa that first night. The bedrooms remained daunting projects, and candor compelled me to admit a deeper reluctance. Sleeping beneath the looming presence of that attic portal felt unwise. Around the pitch-black hour of 3, a sound jolted me from shallow slumber. Footfalls distinct and deliberate, pacing the floor directly overhead within the profound stillness of the house. Sleep, when it finally reclaimed me, was troubled by visions of that unassuming door. The subsequent days settled into a rhythm of toil. Dawn till dusk I wrestled with the house's neglect, clearing rooms choked with forgotten belongings, scrubbing ingrained dirt from walls, mending what frailties I could. Slowly, painstakingly, the residence began shedding its air of dereliction. But the attic remained inviolate. Each morning brought the resolution, today, and each evening yielded a fresh justification for delay. The strangest part? The source of my aversion remained nebulous, an intuition deep and guttural whispering that something waited wrong behind that door. Day 5 dawned, extinguishing my reservoir of excuses. The lower floors were largely reclaimed. The attic's turn could no longer be deferred. I stood at the hallway's entrance that morning, coffee clutched in a trembling hand, gaze fixed on the door. Objectively unremarkable. Aged white paint, a tarnished brass knob, a frame subtly warped by time. Yet, observing it felt like trying to breathe through concrete. I compelled myself forward, each footfall leaden as if wading through resisting water. The proximity amplified the frantic thrumming in my ribs until, reaching the door, my breath came in ragged gasps, mimicking the aftermath of a desperate sprint. My fingers brushed the knob. Its coldness seeped into my skin, shocking. With a protracted, arthritic groan, the door swung inward, revealing a steep, narrow staircase ascending into absolute darkness. The smell surged instantly, that sharp, coppery tang from my arrival, now concentrated, potent. Fumbling, I located the light switch. A futile click echoed in the silence. My phone's flashlight beam sliced through the gloom, catching motes of dust in its stark glare. The stairs, though darkened by age, appeared structurally sound. I placed a tentative foot on the bottom step. It creaked, protesting my weight, but held. Then came the sound, a soft thump from the unseen space above, the unmistakable noise of an object dropped onto floorboards. I froze. Flashlight beam locked onto the void at the stair's apex. Silence returned, broken only by the ragged cadence of my own breathing. A minute stretched, taut with listening. Just the house settling, I rationalized, the groan of old timbers. 3 more steps upward, each eliciting a sharp complaint from the wood. Sweat traced cold paths down my spine, despite the cool air. 4 steps, 5, halfway. The attic's interior began to resolve itself in the flashlight's sweep. Stacked trunks, shrouded shapes, boxes, more clutter awaiting my attention. The next step groaned with particular vehemence, and simultaneously, something rolled across the floorboards above. Not a random settling, but a distinct movement directly towards the stairwell's opening. A fleeting impression of roundness. Then it tumbled past me, bouncing erratically down the steps. I recoiled, stumbling, nearly losing my footing. The object, an old, scuffed baseball, came to rest in the hallway below. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. "Hello?" The word emerged as a strangled croak. Only the rush of blood in my ears answered. I angled the light higher, sweeping its beam across the attic space. Cobwebs draped like funeral shrouds. More boxes, the skeletal frame of a rocking chair in the periphery. A breath, deep and rasping, turned my blood to ice. It emanated from the farthest corner, cloaked in impenetrable shadow. This was no exhalation of ancient plumbing or shifting foundations. It was breath, measured, deliberate, followed by another. I scrambled backward down the stairs, clumsy in my terror, nearly pitching headlong. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound unnaturally loud. I fled down the hallway, not pausing until the relative sanctuary of the kitchen, hands gripping the counter edge, knuckles white, fighting to regulate my breathing. Minutes crawled by. The house resumed its profound silence. When the tremors in my hands finally subsided, I acted with perceived rationality. I called Finn, my oldest friend. "You seriously think someone's squatting in your dead uncle's attic?" Finn's voice, filtered through the phone, dripped skepticism after I recounted the ordeal. "The breathing, Finn, I heard it clear as day, and that baseball didn't just decide to take a tumble." "Old houses groan, Leo. Could be anything. Raccoons, squirrels." "This wasn't animal sounds. Please, just come with me. Check it out." A sigh traveled down the line. "All right, but if it's a family of masked bandits with bushy tails, drinks are on you for a month." Finn arrived an hour later, armed with a sturdy baseball bat and a high lumen lantern that promised to banish shadows. He let out a low whistle upon seeing the house's exterior. "Geez, Leo, your uncle really let this place slide into oblivion." I recounted the pervasive unease surrounding the attic as I led him upstairs. He nodded, mostly silent, absorbing the narrative. Yet, when we stood before the attic door itself, even Finn hesitated. "Okay," he conceded, his voice hushed. "Gotta admit, this is giving me the creeps. Definite wrong vibe off this door." "Told you." I reached for the knob, then recoiled instinctively. "You want honors?" Finn tightened his grip on the bat, then shoved the door open. The hinges shrieked their metallic protest. He flicked on the lantern, bathing the stairwell in a harsh, clinical white light. Stillness reigned. No breathing, no errant baseballs. Together we ascended, the stairs groaning under our combined weight. The attic unfolded before us, cluttered yet seemingly mundane in the lantern's glare. Dust motes danced in the powerful beam. That coppery scent persisted stronger here, almost cloying. "You smell that?" I whispered, the sound swallowed by the dust. Finn nodded grimly, like old pennies or blood. "Blood?" My stomach clenched. "Or rust," he amended quickly, though his tone lacked conviction. "Probably just rust." We ventured deeper, Finn methodically sweeping the lantern's beam across the space. The shrouded forms resolved into derelict furniture, chairs, a listing dresser, more trunks. A uniform, thick layer of dust coated everything except... There! I pointed towards the floor near the far wall. A distinct pathway, wiped clean through the settled dust, led towards the shadowy corner. Footprints. Recent. Finn raised the bat slightly. We followed the trail cautiously, our own steps echoing unnaturally in the stagnant air. The path ended at a cluster of boxes, partially obscured by a sheet-draped armoire. Closer inspection revealed the boxes were indeed disturbed. Their placement didn't align with the undisturbed dust outlines surrounding them. I reached for the topmost box. Finn's hand clamped onto my arm. "Hold up, maybe we should dial 911 first." Before a response could form, a loud crash erupted from behind us. We spun simultaneously. The rocking chair, previously still in the lantern's periphery, was now swaying gently back and forth, despite our distance from it. As we watched, Transfixed, its motion gradually subsided into stillness. "Right," Finn breathed, his voice tight, calling the cops. "Now." It was then the breathing returned. Deep, ragged, impossibly close, seeming to originate from directly behind us. We pivoted back towards the boxes. The sheet covering the armoire stirred, a subtle ripple, as if touched by a draft in the utterly still air. Finn's hand trembled as he lifted the lantern higher. Its beam caught something dark, viscous, seeping from beneath the lowest box. A thick, blackish liquid pooling and spreading across the floorboards. The metallic stench became instantly suffocating. We bolted. The descent down the stairs is a fragmented memory, a stumble, a near fall, the clatter of Finn dropping the bat, the jarring impact as we slammed the attic door shut, hard enough to splinter the frame. We didn't cease running until we burst out of the house and into the relative safety of my car. 20 minutes later, flashing lights painted the street. 4 officers entered the house while Finn and I waited, nerves frayed in the kitchen. An eternity seemed to pass before they descended. Their findings, nothing. No intruder, no signs of forced entry, no dark liquid, not even the footprints we'd described. Just dust, old furniture, and boxes filled with Silas's accumulated junk. "Floor's solid up there," one officer reported, his tone professionally placating. "Probably rats in the walls making noises. These old places, they can play tricks on your mind." I nodded, offered murmured thanks, though the certainty of what we experienced remained unshaken. The police departed. Finn left soon after, extracting a promise that I'd stay at his place. I agreed, needing only to retrieve some clothes. Alone again, I re-entered the house. The setting sun cast elongated, distorted shadows through the grimy windows. I ascended the stairs slowly, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. The attic door stood sentinel at the hall's end, deceptively benign in the dying light. As I drew level with it, a distinct sound scraped against the wood from the other side, like fingernails being drawn slowly, deliberately, down the painted surface. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I'm at Finn's now, committing this to record while the details remain sharp. Tomorrow, the solicitor gets a call. Silas can have his house and whatever entity resides within its uppermost reaches. Some inheritances carry too steep a price. But the detail that truly unravels me is this: the baseball. It was resting on my passenger seat when I finally fled in my car. The very same scuffed sphere that had tumbled down the attic stairs. I never picked it up. I certainly never carried it outside. And upon closer examination, under the dome light's sterile glow, I saw the faded ink inscription: "For Silas, happy birthday, 1986, love, Clara." The baseball remains in my possession. Sometimes in the dead quiet of night, I imagine I hear it, a faint rolling sound across my bedroom floor. Yet when I snap on the light, it's invariably inert, precisely where I left it, watching perhaps, possessed of some secret knowledge. The house still stands, awaiting its cleansing, its sale. The solicitor's calls persist, inquiries about my progress hanging unanswered in my voicemail. Let another soul take up the burden. Let someone else brave those stairs, confront the occupant of that attic. Certain doors are best left unopened. Certain legacies are best refused. Certain truths are not worth unearthing. Dreams plague me now, returning me to that attic. In them, I always reach the summit of the stairs. I always peer behind the stacked boxes. I always witness what waits in that shadowed corner. But upon waking, the image evaporates, leaving only a residue of terror, a mercy, perhaps. All I retain is the certainty. Something remains within that attic, drawing breath in the suffocating darkness. And occasionally, driving past late at night, before I learned better, I'd glimpse a light in the attic window. Not the beam of a flashlight, nor the glow of a lantern, but something darker, redder, like fading embers, or watchful eyes. I don't drive past the house anymore. Sleep shattered 3 nights past, ripped away by a sound that didn't belong. A furtive scrape at my home office door deep within the nocturnal quiet. My heart became a frantic drummer against my ribs. A dream, I told myself then, a phantom echo in the sleeping house. But morning light revealed the lie. Jagged gouges clawed into the wood around the handle. Desperate etchings left by someone or something trying to gain entry while I slept. That stark evidence was the first undeniable fissure in the ordinary reality of my home. My name is Elias Thorne. 39 years circumscribed my life, lived largely in solitude. 6 months ago, this house became my repository, chosen for its unassuming structure and the promise of a dedicated space for my cloistered archival endeavors. I delve into the dust of the past, tracing obscure histories and verifying forgotten documents for private clientele. The dwelling itself seemed unremarkable. Affordable rent and a layout conducive to my work, including a small upper room transformed into my sanctum. Desk, computer, utilitarian filing cabinets, shelves bowing slightly under the weight of reference texts. Austerity reigns here. I favor function, order, clarity. For weeks, nothing disturbed the rhythm of my days. Spent navigating digital labyrinths and sifting through physical remnants of time. I pursue elusive fragments of information for those willing to pay, often working late into the embracing silence, though never sacrificing the necessary 6 hours of rest. A routine meticulously crafted governs my existence, or it did until roughly a month ago, when the strange intrusions began their unsettling campaign. The marred door was not an isolated incident. One dawn, I entered my office to find a chaotic spill of documents across the floor, leaves disturbed as if by impatient hands. Certain papers had vanished, only to reappear later downstairs, discovered near the living room couch, a place I distinctly recall not carrying them to. Fatigue, I initially reasoned, a lapse in my usually precise habits. Yet the memory resisted. I am pathologically organized, reliant on systems that guard against the very disarray I now confronted. The following day intensified the strangeness. A heavy reference volume lay open on my desk, turned to a chapter unvisited for years, detailing arcane research methodologies. Its subject, forbidden medical studies, procedures long condemned and buried by authorities. Though irrelevant to my current projects, its deliberate placement, the specific page exposed, sent a frisson of disquiet through me. I closed the book, returned it to its shelf, but the sensation lingered, an insistent nudge towards knowledge I hadn't sought. prudence demanded I begin locking the office door. Each night, the click of the tumbler checked twice for certainty. Yet, morning after morning, I'd find it slightly ajar, open by a mere inch, a subtle defiance of my precautions. Books shifted on their shelves like restless sleepers. Documents continued their phantom migrations, disappearing from my desk only to materialize in unexpected corners of the house. The thought of a conventional intruder gnawed at me, yet aside from those initial scratches, no sign of forced entry presented itself. Valuables remained untouched. Wallet on the kitchen counter, television screen dark and undisturbed. A locksmith was summoned, the old mechanism replaced with a newer, ostensibly more secure one. A fleeting sense of safety settled over me. That very night, however, around the witching hour of 2, a solid thump resonated from the hallway. I slid from bed, limbs trembling slightly, mouth instantly dry. Flashlight, kept bedside for such nameless dreads, became a cold weight in my hand. Easing my bedroom door open revealed the dim corridor, illuminated only by the faint glow of a single nightlight. Near my office door stood a shape, a tenebrous outline, unmistakably human, yet devoid of detail. A silhouette against the gloom. I froze, breath catching, a cold sweat blooming on my brow. A floorboard groaned under my tentative weight. The umbral figure turned its head. A low, incoherent susurrus reached me like words spoken through water. Flashlight beam raised, trembling slightly, I managed, "Who's there?" Silence answered. The figure remained, an unnerving statue in the dimness. My heart hammered a desperate rhythm. Flee back to the bedroom, call the police. The rational thoughts warred with a paralyzing curiosity. Inch by cautious inch, I advanced. Then the figure drifted backward, less walking than gliding, receding like smoke. As it passed the nightlight's weak radiance, I caught a fleeting, almost transparent glimpse of a face. It vanished around the corner leading downstairs. I surged forward, flashlight beam cutting the air, but the hallway was empty. The front door bolted, windows secured. A chill traced patterns on my skin. The hairs on my nape prickled. Back at the office door, I found it locked, just as I'd left it from the outside. But new smudges marred the handle's vicinity. Dark, greasy fingerprints. My keys rested heavy in my pocket. The violation felt impossible, spectral. Retreating to my bedroom, I banished the shadows with every available light, seeking solace in artificial glare, attempting to quell the tremor in my hands. Morning brought renewed chaos to my office, scattered papers again. These, however, spoke of antiquated experiments, procedures flagrantly defying ethical boundaries, subjects alien to my usual genealogical and historical research. Where had they come from? A nagging memory surfaced, a box discovered in the attic upon moving in, filled with the previous occupant's detritus. Random data, notes on medical trials, unapproved techniques. I deemed it worthless, consigning it to the back of a filing cabinet. Retrieving the dusty container, I examined its contents anew. Notes, fragmented yet obsessive, hinted at clandestine experiments. A faded signature emerged from the brittle pages, Dr. A. Finch, or something close. The script spoke of prolonged consciousness, post-mortem continuity, vague, disorganized theories that nonetheless radiated a chilling intensity. This Dr. Finch, whoever he was, had trod dangerous, unethical paths. My unease deepened. A part of me recoiled, urged me to destroy the unsettling legacy. Another, the archivist perhaps, felt compelled to understand if this was the source of the disturbances plaguing my sanctuary. For now, I set the documents aside. Sleep became an elusive quarry that night. The silhouette by the office door replayed behind my eyelids, accompanied by the phantom echo of that indistinct mumbling. I left my bedroom door ajar, a sentinel awaiting movement in the shadowed corridor. Around 3, a whisper, clearer this time, slithered through the silence. Archives must finish. My pulse leaped, blanket thrown aside, flashlight grasped, bare feet cold against the floorboards. I stepped into the hall. The silhouette stood there again, closer now, near my own threshold, discernibly male, draped in the faint outline of a coat. No eyes visible, merely shadowed depressions suggesting a face. It turned towards the office, running a hand along the wood. A sound like fingernails scraping, insistent and dry, filled the air. My attempt to shout, to order it out, emerged as a pathetic croak. It shifted its attention back to me, mouth moving, but only garbled sounds escaped. "Get out of my house," I finally forced out. A slight tilt of the head, an air of confusion, perhaps. Then the repetition. Archives. Old records. I took a hesitant step forward. It retreated, melting down the stairs. I pursued, heart pounding, but reached the landing to find only emptiness. Living room, kitchen, every lock, every window, all secure. Tension coiled in my muscles. Throat parched, hands trembling. I sought refuge in a glass of water, eventually settling in the living room armchair until dawn painted the windows gray. Certainty had solidified. I was contending with something beyond the bounds of the normal. With daylight's return, I immersed myself in Finch's documents, scrutinizing every line. Phrases leaped out. Activation of old facilities, location-based attachments, continuation beyond the living. A chilling hypothesis formed. Perhaps Dr. Finch had died here, his obsessive research unfinished, leaving behind an echo, an imprint tethered to this place, forever seeking completion. Ghosts. The notion felt alien, yet it was the only narrative that accommodated the phenomena. The moving books, the displaced documents, the spectral figure seemingly trying to resume its forbidden work. Answers demanded pursuit. A visit to the local records office unearthed the name, Dr. Alistair Finch, resident of this address some 20 years prior. A researcher affiliated with a private facility shuddered amidst scandal over unethical practices. Official records stated he vanished under suspicious circumstances. No confirmed death, only rumors. Fled the country, assumed a new identity, or perished within these very walls. The trail went cold, leaving only ambiguity and a deepening sense of dread. That evening, I resolved to keep vigil. Locking the office door as usual, I extinguished the lights and positioned myself on a small stool in the hallway's darkness. Around 1:30 a.m., the rattling began, the doorknob twisting, clicking futilely. My chest tightened, adrenaline surged. Flashlight beams stabbed the darkness, revealing the silhouette crouched before the door, shoulder pressed against the wood as if trying to force it. It turned towards my light, then slowly rose. More distinct now. Hollow cheeks etched into a long face, eyes like dark pools, attire vaguely old-fashioned, perhaps from decades past. Its lips moved, forming words I perceived more than heard. "I need the files." The pronouncement, though faint, felt chillingly direct. No scent accompanied it, only a draft of unnatural cold. I stood my ground. "Stop messing with my work," I said, my voice betraying a tremor. It remained still for a beat, then raised a hand, reaching towards the door and through it, as if passing through mist rather than solid oak. An audible click echoed as the lock disengaged from within. The door swung silently open. My breath hitched. Scrambling to my feet, I shone the light into the office. Chaos erupted. Papers flew from shelves as if caught in a vortex, fluttering down like wounded birds. The silhouette stepped inside, wading through the scattered leaves, fingers rifling through them with frantic purpose. It spun towards me, emitting a sound, not loud but possessing a weight, a pressure that resonated painfully in my ears. A silent concussion of rage. The words remained unintelligible, but the fury was palpable. My flashlight flickered erratically, my legs turned to lead, rooting me to the spot. Then, abrupt silence. The figure surveyed the strewn documents, pacing slowly, examining them. Short phrases punctuated the quiet. Final steps incomplete, must finish. My heart pounded against my ribs. Breathe slowly, I commanded myself. Don't betray the fear. What do you want? The question tore from my constricted throat. It turned, its expression unreadable, blank. Then, with startling speed, it rushed past me, a cold wind in its wake, disappearing down the hallway. The office door slammed shut behind it. Footsteps, heavy and hurried, descended the stairs. When I followed, moments later, the house was still. He was gone. After that night, the imperative was clear. Deal with Finch's research. I spread the papers across my desk, seeking the core of the obsession. More notes on proscribed experiments, typed and handwritten fragments detailing a relentless drive to continue trials, instructions for obscure instruments, mentions of subterranean labs lacking specific locations. Anxiety pulsed through me. The deeper I delved, the more certain I became. These files were the anchor, the unfinished task binding the spectral researcher to this place. I gathered the volatile documents into a large pile. The urge to incinerate them was strong, a cleansing fire to purge the house of this lingering obsession. Yet caution prevailed. Destruction might provoke something worse, tighten the knot rather than sever it. Instead, I carefully stacked them within their original box and secreted it away in my bedroom closet. The subsequent nights offered a fragile calm. Occasional faint shuffles still whispered from beyond the office door, but the silhouette remained unseen. The lock held firm till morning. My books stayed put. Relief proved ephemeral. A week later, the voice returned, pulling me from shallow sleep near 2 a.m. "Bring me the files," repeated twice, a chillingly polite command. Sitting on my bed's edge, shoulders rigid, I knew compliance was the only path forward. I retrieved the box from the closet's depths, carried its unsettling weight downstairs to the living room. Placing it on the coffee table, I spoke into the waiting silence. "Here are the files you want." My palms were damp, my stomach clenched. The air grew perceptibly colder. A door down the hall creaked softly. A shimmer disturbed the periphery of my vision, a distortion by the wall. Laying a hand flat on the box lid, I repeated, "Take them." The papers inside stirred, rustling as if caught by an unseen draft. lifting and settling across the table's surface without spilling onto the floor. I watched, transfixed, heart drumming a frantic cadence. Slowly, inexplicably, the pages subsided, settling back into the confines of the box. The oppressive chill receded. The air felt breathable again. Turning, I saw him, the silhouette standing near the window. He raised a hand, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement, then slowly faded, dissolving into the pre-dawn gloom. I stared at the empty space by the window, suspended between deliverance and dread. My decision was swift. I carried the box outside, locking it securely in the trunk of my car. Those papers would not spend another night under my roof. Tomorrow, a storage facility, anonymous and distant. Perhaps removing the object of his obsession from the house would finally sever the tie, allowing whatever presence lingered here to move on. That is the current state of affairs. Days have passed in relative peace. No fresh scratches mar the office door. Books remain aligned. Documents stay put. Yet the unease lingers, a low hum beneath the surface of the quiet. Sleep remains watchful. I find myself checking the hallway compulsively, half expecting the tenebrous outline to reappear. So far, only silence answers. Perhaps he is appeased, the files relocated to his satisfaction, or perhaps his search continues elsewhere for something more elusive. Answers elude me. All I know is the knot of tension in my chest has loosened, allowing me to work, to breathe within these walls without constant interruption. But the memory remains indelible, the silhouette in the hallway, mumbling of archives forever trapped in his incomplete work. My lease runs its course, and then I leave. Staying longer feels untenable, even with the cessation of activity. Sharing space with the ghost of such grim ambition is a burden I no longer wish to bear. Whether Dr. Alistair Finch truly died here or simply vanished into the world remains unknown. I know only that his spectral persistence made my life a study in quiet terror for weeks. Perhaps I will never see him again. For now, the ability to sleep through the night, undisturbed by whispers and scratching at my door, is solace enough. To feel finally alone in my own house again, that is all I require. The peculiar groans of this old house were once just background static, easily dismissed, until last night. That's when the familiar symphony of settling timbers and rattling panes warped into something else entirely. Around 11, adrift in the mundane ritual of brushing my teeth, the familiar quiet fractured. My sanctuary, this rambling two-story relic with its perpetually complaining floors and doors that sighed shut rather than clicked, has been my solitary domain for 3 years. A cheap lease, a consequence of drafty sashes and capricious plumbing that deterred most. But these eccentricities I'd embraced. Manageable quirks, I called them. Last night's intrusion, however, defied management. Having shed the day for an aged t-shirt and worn sweatpants, my hand hovered near the light switch. Then came the sound. Not the house settling, not some nocturnal creature scrabbling outside, but the unmistakable cadence of footfalls in the corridor. Slow, measured, heavy upon the time-worn floorboards. An initial paralysis gripped me. My own logic offered flimsy reassurances, settling wood, wind, but the sound possessed a distinct deliberation. My gaze fixed on the bedroom door frame, pulse accelerating, alone. always alone here. Visitors were a rarity, never unannounced. No one should be traversing that hallway. Intruder, the thought flashed cold. I remained utterly still, listening, breath held captive for what felt like an eternity, though perhaps only 5 seconds passed. My mouth turned to dust. Swallowing felt like effort. My hand instinctively sought the dense metal cylinder of the heavy flashlight resting on the nightstand. My impromptu cudgel. Darkness, I reasoned, might offer concealment. Plunging the room into blackness, I sidled towards the door, pressing my ear to the cool wood. Through the sliver of space beneath, only impenetrable hallway shadow greeted me. The footsteps ceased. Silence stretched, taut and expectant. Then a different noise, a soft friction, fabric perhaps, dragging languidly across the floor. The pacing resumed, back and forth, a restless sentinel just beyond my door. Courage, thin but present, urged me to crack the door, to steal a glimpse into the shadowed passage. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a deafening beat in my own ears. The instant my fingers brushed the cool brass of the knob, a voice whispered. Faint initially, a mere filament of sound I might have conjured from fear, it coalesced, gaining texture. It spoke in flowing, unfamiliar phonemes, a language utterly alien. Low, serrated, the voice rasped, the words nonsensical until impossibly one broke through the strange cascade. My name. My own name, Elias, nestled incongruously amongst those bizarre syllables. My hand recoiled as if burned. A glacial chill spread through my gut. Breath hitched, shallow and rapid. My fingers, I noticed with detachment, trembled. Call the authorities. The thought screamed, but the flashlight felt like an anchor, and any sound seemed a betrayal. Uncertainty pinned me there while the whispering continued, rising and falling in a cadence that mimicked chanting yet offered no solace, only a chilling intimacy. Hearing my name woven into that alien tapestry made my skin crawl. Again, I reached for the doorknob. A simple plan formed. Fling the door wide, blind whatever waited with the flashlight's beam. Confront it, an intruder perhaps, playing cruel games. Yet, as my fingers closed around the brass, the whispering intensified, morphing into an urgent, sibilant mutter, too rapid now to parse anything but the recurring echo of my name, Elias, Elias, like a dire warning against proceeding. I twisted the knob. It refused to yield. Impossible. I never lock this door from within. No external lock exists. I jiggled it, rattling the mechanism futilely, stuck fast. Pressing my shoulder into the sturdy oak, I found it unyielding, as if the frame itself had warped, sealing me in. Then a distinct counterpressure bloomed against the wood from the other side, firm and deliberate, like a body leaning heavily upon it. The whispering surged, a palpable presence now, inches away, breathing its strange litany through the wood. Adrenaline surged, hot and sharp. I threw my weight against the door again, slamming my shoulder into the unmoving panel. My heart threatened to splinter my ribs. Sweat slicked my palms. Still, it held fast. The voice devolved into a rasping hiss, a vortex of sound filling my ears. My name a recurring punctuation mark in the guttural flow. Panic erupted. Leave me alone. The words tore from my throat, thin and shaky, lacking any conviction. I'm calling the police. I scrambled for my phone on the nightstand. The signal bars, usually reliable, showed nothing. Zero. I stabbed at the call icon anyway. Dead air. My throat constricted. Breathing became a ragged enterprise. Retreating from the door, I kept the flashlight beam trained on the impassive wood. The whispering settled into a low, pervasive drone. Trapped. My window overlooked the fenced backyard, a perilous second-story drop. My mind churned, conjuring images, a burglar, a deranged stranger, yet that voice, inhuman, the rasp, the alien tongue, it belonged to nothing familiar, nothing earthly. Minutes bled into an eternity, measured by the shifting volume of the drone, sometimes a near subliminal hum, sometimes a vibration felt deep in my chest. Intermittently, I tested the door. Each touch provoked a surge in the whispering, a clear admonition. Sweat beaded on my forehead while a contradictory chill snaked down my arms. My legs trembled beneath me. Finally, desperation fueled a raw shout, my fist hammering the wood. "I'm not afraid." A blatant lie screamed into the oppressive dark. The voice didn't answer in words this time. Instead, a sound scraped across the other side of the door. Nails, perhaps, or claws, digging rough channels into the wood. The noise raised the hairs on my neck. Backing away again, flashlight beam unwavering, I scanned my side of the door, unmarked, but the grating sound painted a vivid picture of violation just beyond. I paced the confines of my room, searching for leverage, a tool, anything. My meager toolbox resided downstairs, useless. Back to the phone, frantic attempts yielding only static-laced failure. A single dropped call. Trapped. I yelled for help through the window, my voice swallowed by the late-night stillness of the sparsely populated block. Below, the familiar fence and overgrown shrubs slumbered under the moon. No lights flickered in response. No saviors emerged. Eventually, the susurrus subsided, softening to a low murmur. It breathed my name a final few times, then dissolved into silence. I remained by the door, straining to hear footsteps, any sign of departure. Nothing. The knob remained stubbornly locked. How? The house fell utterly silent, save for the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. Exhausted, I sank onto the edge of the bed, mopping sweat from my brow. Sleep was unthinkable. Every creak of the old house was magnified. Every shadow seemed to coalesce. Minutes crawled by, marked by my vigilant glances towards the door. Phantoms scratched at the edge of my hearing. Or perhaps it was just frayed nerves. My heart refused to settle. The night's events replayed relentlessly, defying explanation. Fully alert, I waited, watching the window pale with the first hesitant strokes of dawn. With the arrival of faint gray light, I rose, tried the door. The knob turned effortlessly. It swung inward without a whisper of resistance. Hesitantly, I stepped into the dim corridor, the flashlight's beam slicing through the gloom. Familiar wallpaper, familiar floorboards, nothing overtly amiss, yet the very air felt altered, expectant, the house holding its breath. I scanned the hallway walls. No marks. Cautious steps elicited the usual creaks, but only my own footfalls echoed. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the stairwell. No reply. I moved through the upper floor, room by room. Windows secure, locks untouched. Nothing. The thought that I'd dreamt it, hallucinated the entire ordeal, began to take root, fragile but welcome, until I pushed open the door to the guest room across the hall. Usually kept slightly ajar, it served as little more than storage. Boxes, a disused table, perpetually drawn curtains. I stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight beam across the far wall. My stomach plummeted. 4 violent gouges rent the plaster. Long, jagged furrows, deep as malice, spaced like the brutal signature of some immense clawed hand. Paint peeled back in ragged strips, revealing the pale lath beneath. Not superficial scratches, these were wounds carved into the house itself. My fingertips traced the raw edge of one mark. Rough plaster dust crumbled away. The frantic drumming resumed in my chest. Fresh, undeniably fresh. The scraping sound from the night. This must have been its source. But how? My bedroom door had been impassably sealed. This room, too, showed no signs of forced entry, its windows securely locked. The pieces refused to fit. Recoiling from the wall, a wave of nausea washed over me. Deep breaths did little to steady the tremor in my hands. I scanned the dusty room again. Boxes undisturbed, the small closet untouched. Only this violent inscription marred the quiet neglect. Downstairs, the meticulous check began anew. Every window latch, every deadbolt, all secure just as I'd left them. Confusion warred with rising dread. My body ached with residual tension. The memory of the voice, intimate and alien, whispering my name, looped in my mind. Flicking on the living room lights offered a small, flickering island of normalcy. My phone, resting on the kitchen counter, now displayed full bars. Call the police? And say what? Footsteps, a locked door, a disembodied voice speaking my name, and claw marks? They'd search, find nothing, perhaps suggest raccoons or self-inflicted damage born of stress. The thought brought only frustration, a deeper sense of isolation. Cold water splashed on my face at the kitchen sink, felt bracing, but I avoided my reflection. The tremor persisted. A glass of water did nothing to soothe the arid landscape of my throat or the frantic race of my thoughts. Sunlight now streamed robustly through the windows as I forced myself back upstairs, drawn inexorably to the guest room. Perhaps daylight would reveal footprints, some overlooked clue. Ascending the stairs felt like crossing a threshold into hostile territory. The house felt watchful, sentient. Each groan of the floorboards was a jolt. Inside the guest room, the marks stood stark and brutal in the morning light, ragged edges, a fine dusting of plaster on the floor beneath. I scrutinized the hardwood. No prints, no stains. Corners thick with dust remained undisturbed. The window, when tested, was firmly locked, frame and sill unmarked. An animal, how could it lock my door, whisper my name? The logic crumbled, queasiness intensified. My skin felt clammy. Back in the hallway, I examined my bedroom door again. The simple interior twist lock operated smoothly, no damage, no sign of tampering. Downstairs once more I paced, searching, under stairs, behind furniture, in the small utility room. Nothing. The house remained preternaturally quiet, amplifying my own heightened senses. I caught myself holding my breath, listening. Only silence answered. The front door, deadbolt secure, chain in place. No forced entry. Back door, likewise locked. I opened it, stepping onto the porch for air. The mundane normalcy of the sunlit backyard felt jarring. Fence intact, gate latched. Nothing stirred. No explanation offered itself. Returning inside, the initial panic had subsided. replaced by a gnawing unease. That voice, so close, so personal. Was it an elaborate, cruel prank? Or something far stranger? My gut rejected the former. Those gouges in the wall were too visceral, too real. The rest of the morning became a cycle of checking and rechecking. The attic hatch in the hallway ceiling, undisturbed beneath its shroud of cobwebs. A brief, flashlight-aided inspection revealed only insulation and forgotten boxes. No tracks, no droppings, nothing. Finally, I collapsed onto the living room sofa, nerves frayed, muscles screaming from sustained tension. My thoughts remained a tangled knot. Sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach. Closing my eyes brought back the whisper in voice, the pressure against the door. A prisoner of memory in my own home. Should I flee? But where? This ramshackle house is mine, my flawed sanctuary. Until last night, it had never betrayed me. I cling to the possibility of hallucination, a waking nightmare, but the claw marks mock that fragile hope. Something was here, something that knew my name. What awaits me tonight? Will I dare sleep in my own bed? Part of me wants to barricade myself in the living room, bathed in artificial light. Another part urges flight, abandonment. But retreat feels like surrender, and besides, where is truly safe? This feels targeted, personal. For now, vigilance is my only recourse. Every lock is checked, double-checked. Furniture rearranged for clearer sightlines. My phone, fully charged, rests beside me. I wait, I listen. The day stretches, thin and strange. Each creak, each sigh of the old house is suspect. My gaze drifts repeatedly towards the stairs, towards the violated room I now dread entering. Fixing the damage feels secondary to understanding it, surviving it. The sight of those marks churns my stomach. Irrefutable proof that my sanity remains intact, but my safety does not. Perhaps I'll call Maeve later, invent some excuse, unease, strange noises, just to have another human presence within these walls. Though a deeper fear whispers, what if it returns? Locks and bolts were no deterrent before. I recount this now, not seeking solutions, but to cast these words into the void, a record in case the silence breaks again. Rationality struggles for purchase. There must be an explanation, yet none satisfies the chilling totality of the experience. The voice, the impossible lock, the physical scars on the wall. If it comes again tonight, I don't know how I'll react. Fear remains a cold knot in my stomach. My body is a tightly wound spring, but paralysis is a luxury I can no longer afford. Waiting is all that's left. Waiting, listening, and steeling myself to face whatever resides in the shadows of my own home. I will not be cornered again. There was a time the nocturnal road sang a siren song of solitude, the asphalt ribbon unfurling beneath a canopy of quiet stars. I cherished the hush, the cocoon of the car slicing through the dark. Now the crepuscular hours breed only apprehension. Driving after dusk is an ordeal I sidestep whenever feasible, for each glance into the rearview mirror reflects a presence I cannot fathom, an anomaly clinging to the periphery of sight. It began subtly, a mere distortion in the shadowed space behind me, but its insistence grew, its formless dread solidifying. When I pivot, seeking its source directly, nothing. No sound accompanies it, no uttered word, yet the weight of its scrutiny presses down, an invisible gaze I've come to despise. My name is Elias. My livelihood stitches together miles across multiple states, a territory manager for an industrial equipment firm. Highways are my office, back roads my commute. My vehicle, chosen for reliability and endurance, was once my vessel of freedom. Until a few months passed, I reveled in that liberty, pushing through the deepening night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the flickering companionship of the radio. The open road was possibility itself. Never did I entertain thoughts of the uncanny, not until that specific night the silhouette first materialized. I was navigating a desolate stretch of highway, swallowed by an immense rural emptiness. The dashboard clock glowed 10:47 p.m., a detail seared into memory, captured the instant before my gaze snagged on the mirror. The cabin was steeped in shadow save for the faint instrument panel glow and the intermittent sweep of oncoming headlights. Fatigue hummed at the edges of my awareness, but I wasn't near exhaustion. Music murmured from the speakers. My thoughts drifted towards the next day's appointments when my eyes, by chance or compulsion, flicked to the rear view. Something stirred in the back seat. Initially, I dismissed it as the fleeting reflection of passing lights, a phantom born of glass and motion. I blinked, refocusing. The impression lingered, a dark contour, the vague suggestion of shoulders and a head, hovering indistinctly in the center of the rear bench. An instantaneous, icy cascade thrilled down my spine. The fine hairs on my arms lifted. A knot tightened low in my gut. My head snapped around. A ridiculous reflexive check for an impossible stowaway from the last rest area. The seat was vacant. I returned my gaze to the mirror. The shape had dissolved. I drove on, chanting internal reassurances about tricks of light and weary eyes. I cranked the radio volume, forcing my concentration onto the hypnotic white lines. Yet, every subsequent glance at the mirror was fraught with tension, a subconscious bracing for the shape's return. Nothing further disturbed the journey that night. I reached home near 2 a.m., parked, and willed myself to expunge the incident. But the unease lingered, a dissonant note in the quiet chambers of my mind. 2 days later found me returning from a client meeting in another town. The meeting ran late. Rush hour snared me on the way out. By the time the highway opened up, night had fully descended, well past 9. Inevitably, my thoughts circled back to the peculiar sighting. I fought it, attributing it to overtiredness, ocular games. Yet, perhaps an hour into the drive, a familiar form coalesced in the mirror, sharper this time, distinctly humanoid, leaning forward slightly, as if positioned directly between the front seats. A wave of visceral panic surged through me. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as I stared rigidly ahead. My heart hammered against my ribs. Breath hitched shallow in my throat. "Look back," a frantic internal voice commanded. Gripping the wheel tighter, I wrenched my head around. Emptiness greeted me. My gaze snapped back to the mirror, still vacant. I exhaled raggedly, a tremor of foolishness running through me. I tried to loosen the tension seizing my shoulders, attempted a dismissive chuckle. It died in my throat, because just then, from the absolute corner of my vision, A flicker of movement registered in the mirror once more. A violent jerk of my head revealed nothing. This unsettling dance continued for the remainder of the drive. Fleeting motion glimpsed only when my attention was averted. I arrived home vibrating with anxiety, collapsing into bed immediately, though sleep offered little respite. The following day, I was jumpy, unnerved. I confided in my brother, describing strange reflections during my nocturnal drives. He offered a jest about overworked imaginations. I clung to that possibility, but the visitations persisted, escalating over the ensuing weeks. They became almost routine. Whenever darkness claimed the roads, I sensed it, an impalpable passenger. Sometimes the mirror held only that faint, nebulous shape. Other times it appeared closer, looming forward between the seats. And on nights when the mirror remained clear, the feeling persisted, a heavy, watchful presence. No voice ever breached the silence, yet an intuition grew. It yearned to communicate. One evening, I pulled into a nearly deserted gas station around 11. After refueling, I climbed back inside, pausing for a moment, deliberately scanning the back seat in the fluorescent glare. Empty, clean upholstery, no stray objects. I resolved to drive home calmly, rationally. But the moment the engine turned over and I merged onto the highway, the familiar sensation returned. Insidious and immediate. It felt as though someone had silently slipped into the seat behind me while I was preoccupied. My scalp prickled. A clammy coldness seeped into my skin. My breathing quickened. My eyes darted compulsively to the mirror. The silhouette flickered, appearing and vanishing at the edge of perception. At one point, it seemed starkly centered, as if peering intently between the headrests. Panic flared and the car swerved violently before I wrestled it back under control. I silenced the radio, craving absolute quiet, but the absence of sound only amplified the tension. Every minute creak of the chassis, every hum of the engine seemed magnified. My own breath sounded harsh, intrusive. I tried speaking aloud, a desperate mantra. Calm down, there's nothing there. Just keep driving. My voice trembled, betraying me. That night, midway home, its behavior shifted. I sensed movement adjacent to my shoulder, not seen but felt. A subtle displacement of air, like someone leaning intimately close. Nothing registered in my peripheral vision, yet the proximity was undeniable, like a soft, unseen brush against my left side. A strangled yelp escaped me as I jerked the wheel again, narrowly avoiding the shoulder. I corrected, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my sternum. Seconds later, a faint odor permeated the cabin. Something like old, decaying leather or damp, neglected fabric. It was subtle but nauseating. Unsure what else to do, I pressed down on the accelerator. Escape was the only imperative. When I finally skidded into my driveway, I flung the door open and scrambled out, my body trembling uncontrollably. I stood there in the darkness, breath catching in my throat, staring through the rear window at the empty, silent back seat. Nothing. I fumbled for my keys, hurried inside, bolted the door, and spent the remainder of the night huddled on the couch, wide awake. My palms remained slick with sweat, my eyes darting at every shadow in the living room. The thought surfaced unwelcome. Was this stress? Was I fracturing, experiencing some bizarre fatigue-induced hallucination? And yet, the following day dawned with a deceptive normalcy. I performed my duties, conversed with clients, actively suppressed the nocturnal terror, until evening approached. Then the familiar dread began its slow, cold crawl up my spine. Another trip loomed later that week. I meticulously planned, aiming for a return before sunset, but meetings inevitably stretched, delays accrued, and darkness caught me on the road once more. That drive surpassed previous horrors. Almost immediately, the shape materialized in the mirror, faint initially, a static shadow. For a time, it remained passive. Then a distinct rustling sound emanated from the back seat, like the shifting of heavy fabric. My head whipped around. Nothing, of course, but the air felt suddenly colder, my breath coming in shallow, painful gasps. I fiddled with the climate controls, desperate for a rational explanation, a draft. It changed nothing. The rustling persisted intermittently. Then a soft, distinct tap sounded on the rear window directly behind my head. Just once, I nearly vaulted from my seat. Closer to home, the presence seemed to surge forward again. This time, I felt it, a feather-light but definite pressure near my left shoulder. My entire body locked rigid. My eyes burned, refusing to blink, fixed on the road ahead. A desperate urge to pull over, warred with the lack of any safe haven on the narrow, unlit road. I drove onward, knuckles bone white on the wheel. The shape remained, oppressively close, its proximity suggesting an attempt to whisper. No words formed, only a faint, sibilant hiss, disturbingly near my ear. The warmth of my own breath fogging the window beside me felt alien, terrifying. I parked on the street that night, unable to face opening the rear door, even to retrieve my bag. I locked the car remotely and fled inside. Television offered no distraction. Every external noise sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Sleep, when it finally came, was fragmented and nightmarish. I awoke feeling utterly depleted. I contacted my supervisor, inquiring tentatively about restructuring my routes to minimize late drives. The answer was unequivocal. The job demanded flexibility. Late hours were sometimes unavoidable. I tried compensating by starting my days at dawn, hoping to beat the sunset home, but schedules rarely bent to my anxieties. Gradually, I developed a new habit, anxiously monitoring the descending sun. As dusk bled across the sky, that familiar knot of panic would tighten in my stomach. Colleagues began to notice my strained demeanor. Was I all right? Just tired, I'd murmur, unwilling to voice the truth, the sheer lunacy of confessing to a spectral passenger. But the sightings continued, an almost nightly ritual on solo drives. The shape in the rear view, sometimes passive, sometimes leaning, looming. On several occasions, that chilling sensation near my ear returned. The phantom breath, the unheard whisper. Its purpose remained opaque, its nature elusive. I blasted music, hoping to drown out the silence that seemed to invite it. I drove with windows down, the rushing wind a hoped-for exorcism. Neither worked for long. Sometimes in desperation, I'd switch on the overhead dome light, bathing the interior in a sickly yellow glow. This only heightened the anxiety, my eyes fixed on the illuminated back seat, waiting for the silhouette to manifest within the light itself. It never did. It clung to shadow, to the dim interstices of perception. One night I drove for hours with the dome light blazing, a futile act of defiance. Glancing at the mirror, I saw the outline undeterred, superimposed on the lit interior. Daylight hours were spent searching the car for any logical cause. A stray object casting odd reflections, a forgotten item tucked beneath a seat. Nothing. The upholstery was immaculate, the space empty. I considered an ophthalmologist, but my vision remained sharp, clear for everything except this singular, terrifying phenomenon. Weeks bled into months. The anxiety became chronic, a constant companion. Tension settled permanently in my shoulders. My palms grew damp the moment the sun dipped low. I began avoiding rest stops, fearing the return to the car more than the fatigue. I forced myself onward, but my nerves felt frayed to the breaking point. Sleep became increasingly elusive. Minor household noises made me jump. The sense of powerlessness was corrosive. Sometimes driving, I'd speak into the emptiness, a ragged plea, "Leave me alone." It offered no reply, no respite. Then came a mandatory conference requiring a lengthy overnight drive. There was no escaping it. I departed around 6 p.m., hoping to devour as many miles as possible before true darkness fell. The initial hours offered the comforting anonymity of heavy traffic. For a while, nothing. But as the flow thinned and the sky deepened to impenetrable black, the old dread seeped back in. A glance at the mirror confirmed it, there, at the edge of visibility. My heart rate surged. I pulled off at the next exit, forcing down a bitter coffee, a flimsy ritual of normalcy. It achieved nothing. Back on the desolate highway, the shape returned. My muscles began to ache from the unrelenting tension in my grip. Around midnight, I felt a distinct shift behind me, subtle but undeniable, like a weight settling onto the seat. In the mirror, I caught a fleeting, horrifying impression, the definite outline of a hand resting on the edge of the back seat cushion. A sharp intake of breath, a gasp. My head snapped back, only empty upholstery met my gaze. The silence of the night pressed in, but inside my head, chaos reigned. Breath came in ragged bursts. My chest felt constricted. "Just get through it," I chanted silently. "Just make it to the hotel." An hour later, the presence surged closer than ever before. I felt it hovering just beyond my shoulder, an imminent intrusion. I braced instinctively, my skin crawling with anticipation. My mind raced, grasping for explanations, finding none. I realized my shirt was damp with cold sweat. The seatbelt felt suddenly suffocating, yet I dared not release it. My eyes remained locked on the road, wide, unblinking, terrified that looking away, even for a second, would precipitate something worse. I began to whisper, the words barely audible. "Go away, go away, go away." By the time I pulled into the brightly lit hotel parking lot, I was shaking violently. My head felt strangely light, my mouth desert dry. I parked directly under a lamp standard, grabbed my luggage, and practically sprinted into the lobby, nearly forgetting to lock the car. Sleep that night was a shallow, haunted affair. Maybe 2 hours snatched between waves of adrenaline. That trip crystallized a certainty. I could not continue like this. Now I rearrange my life around the sun. Routes are meticulously planned to avoid driving after twilight. Colleagues likely perceive my rigidity as peculiar, perhaps excessive. I don't care. I offer vague excuses, fabricated night vision issues, a preference for early rest. The truth remains unspoken. locked away by embarrassment and the sheer unbelievability of it. I see something sitting in my back seat. It sounds preposterous, yet the experience, the visceral terror, is undeniable. Something occupies that space behind me staring, regardless of impossibility. These days, nocturnal drives are kept brief, unavoidable necessities treated with utmost caution. If possible, I enlist a passenger. The silhouette has never manifested when I'm not alone, a detail that only deepens the unease. My nerves feel permanently abraded, my patience eroded. Sleep remains fragile after any journey undertaken in darkness. Even recounting this now tightens a familiar knot in my stomach. The memory of that shape leaning close, the sensation of its proximity sends a shiver down my spine. My schedule is inflexible. I refuse assignments demanding late-night travel. It's undoubtedly impacting my career prospects, but the alternative is unthinkable. People inquire about the sudden inflexibility, personal obligations. I hedge. The truth that I refuse to be confined in that moving metal box with that thing ever again remains my secret burden. Every involuntary glance into the rearview mirror after sundown triggers a surge of primal dread. Functioning under that constant strain is impossible. Explaining it to anyone untouched by such strangeness, equally so. I wish this account culminated in revelation or resolution. It doesn't. I possess no answers, no method of banishment. My only defense is avoidance, denying it the opportunity to appear. On the rare occasions I am forced to drive late, the familiar fear rises, cold and cloying. I find myself staring into the mirror, paralyzed by the terror of seeing it again. Sometimes a flicker at the edge of sight sends panic through me and I squeeze my eyes shut, reopening them with a desperate hope it was imagined. Other times I simply fix my gaze forward, rigidly focused until I can find a safe place to pull over. There I sit, engine idling, breathing hard, waiting for the frantic pounding in my chest to subside. That is my reality. Call it madness, call it superstition. It changes nothing of the experience itself. A shape inhabits my back seat during solitary night drives. It sometimes leans near, intimate as a confidant, hinting at whispers I never quite hear, just the barest sibilance near my ear. And that persistent, inexplicable horror is more than enough to keep me grounded when darkness falls. My world fractured on what began as an unremarkable research foray. I, Elias Thorne, anthropologist by trade and inclination, had ventured into a region whispered about for its potent tribal relics, seeking material for a treatise on vernacular belief systems. The lore spoke of practices transcending the ordinary, tales I'd mentally cataloged under mythology until I stumbled upon the mask. It lay dormant within a rough-hewn storage chest, sequestered in the Stygian depths of a back room in one of the outlying settlements. Initially, it seemed negligible, crude wood, rudimentary carvings tracing its perimeter, nothing more. Yet a darker stain bloomed on the inner curve, the ghostly imprint of a human face pressed close over time. A peculiar tension hummed up my arms as I lifted it, accompanied by a faint telluric scent, evocative of sun-baked leather and subterranean damp. Compelled by more than academic curiosity, I resolved to carry it back to my temporary quarters for scrutiny. Fieldwork is my lifeblood. These immersions into remote territories, despite the inherent solitude they entail, This expedition commenced like countless others' arrival, introductions to the community's venerable figures, the careful articulation of my purpose, documenting traditions. They presented woven baskets, utilitarian tools, diminutive effigies carved with patient hands. The mask, however, remained unmentioned, unearthed purely by chance, left momentarily unattended in a repository thick with dust and the scent of decay. While the elders retrieved other artifacts, my gaze fell upon the chest. It rested unlatched near a wall mapped with fissures in its plaster skin. Curiosity, that academic imperative, urged me to lift the lid. Amidst folded textiles and small enigmatic totems lay the mask. An inexplicable magnetism drew me to it. The precise reason I reached for it remains elusive, yet that single act irrevocably altered the trajectory of my existence. Back in the confines of my borrowed room, a Spartan cell adjacent to the communal cooking hearth, furnished with little more than a narrow cot bearing my travel pack and a rickety table. The air hung thick with the ghosts of stale oil and aging timber. I placed the mask upon the table's surface. Perching on the cot's edge, I retrieved my notebook, sketching preliminary observations. The border carvings resolved into stylized human forms, each figure dominated by immense vacant eyes. The mask's face itself was uneven, betraying either haste or a paucity of refined tools in its creation. A strange acceleration took hold of my pulse as I examined it. The object possessed a palpable presence, an insistence that held my attention captive. Later, under the cloak of night, an impulse I couldn't rationalize prompted me to don the mask. It felt absurd, a concession to superstition utterly at odds with my empirical training, yet the artifact seemed to demand it. The wood met my skin with a startling coolness. I settled it over my face, securing the strap. A gentle pressure bloomed at my temples. For several heartbeats, I simply stood, breathing the close air of the room. Nothing seemed amiss. The familiar space remained unchanged. Then a flicker, a shearing at the edge of sight, gone as swiftly as it appeared. Fatigue, I reasoned, dismissing it as I removed the mask, rubbing the faint impression from my face. I left the artifact on the table, extinguished the single overhead bulb, and sought rest. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Around the nadir of the night, perhaps 3 a.m, a sound pricked the silence outside my window, a dry, skittering shuffle, like brittle leaves disturbed on stone. I rose, flicked the light back on, peered out into the impenetrable dark. Stillness reigned. Shrugging it off did little to ease the sudden constriction in my chest. Morning found me bleary, head aching with a dull throb. Following a meager breakfast, I returned to the mask, compelled to document further. I slipped it on again just for a moment, intending a methodical scan of the room. As my gaze swept towards the door, reality seemed to waver. A distortion manifested in the air, not quite a ripple, less defined than any metaphor I could conjure, simply a localized transparency, a warp in the visual field. My breath hitched. I stared, transfixed, as the amorphous shape pulsed faintly, then blinked out of existence. I tore the mask away, my heart hammering against my ribs. A minute passed before the tremor in my hands subsided, before I could draw a steady breath. The urge to verify was strong, yet a wave of profound apprehension washed over me, chilling in its intensity. I resolved to conduct controlled observations. waiting until mid-afternoon when sunlight slanted harshly through the window. I drew the curtains partially, bathing the room in a dim, expectant light. Then the mask. I donned it, turning my head with deliberate slowness. At first, only the familiar squalor of the room met my eyes. Then, turning left, I saw it. A figure stood at the foot of my cot. It possessed a shimmering silhouette, partially translucent, undeniably humanoid in outline, yet devoid of discernible features. I froze, every muscle locked. A cold tremor began in my hands, spreading upwards. I felt the fine hairs on my arms prickle and rise. Speech became impossible, a silent scream trapped in my throat. The entity remained motionless, facing me. Beads of sweat formed on my brow, tracing cold paths through the grime on my skin. My hand automatically reached for the strap, desperate to break the connection. Before my fingers found purchase, the figure, its head, I presumed, shifted slightly. It turned, presenting a featureless profile, and dematerialized. I flung the mask onto the table, stumbling back until the wall met my shoulders. Sinking to the floor, I sat there, gasping, my gaze fixed on the inert wooden object. My chest felt banded with iron. My mouth was desert dry. Nothing in my extensive travels, nothing in the breadth of human experience I'd studied, had prepared me for this. Shock warred with an insatiable need for answers. My mind raced, a maelstrom of questions. What were they? Why did this artifact alone reveal them? How many populated this unseen dimension? I remained there for an immeasurable time, simply staring at the mask. That evening, needing air, needing distance, I secreted the mask in my bag and walked through the settlement. The setting sun bled across the sky, casting long shadows down the main dirt thoroughfare. Residents moved with the languid pace of day's end. The air hung heavy, my shirt clinging unpleasantly to my back. I sought a secluded spot, a narrow alley between two dwellings, screened by a dilapidated fence, driven by the urge to know if these phenomena occurred beyond my room. Taking quick, furtive glances through the mask's eye slits, I initially saw only the weathered wood grain of the fence. Then, near a cluster of discarded crates, two shapes materialized. They stood proximate to one another, shimmering outlines against the deepening dusk. A knot tightened in my stomach. My breathing grew shallow and rapid. They seemed engaged in some silent congress, facing each other. Then, as one, they turned towards me. Faceless they might be, yet I felt their regard, an invisible pressure, a focused awareness directed squarely at my position. A battle raged within me to maintain composure. Were they hostile, curious, indifferent? I took a hesitant step forward. The figures held their ground, but their posture, if such a term applied, radiated alertness. My knees felt unstable, my palms slick with sweat. This was no passive observation. They knew I watched them. The encounter felt charged, confrontational. I averted my gaze for a mere second, gathering myself. But when I looked back, the space by the crates was empty. I ripped the mask off, shoved it deep into my bag, and retreated to the dubious sanctuary of my room. The ensuing days became a grueling exercise in self-doubt and compulsive observation. Was I experiencing a psychological break? I performed rudimentary self-checks, temperature normal, pupils reactive. My notebook filled with meticulous, almost frantic descriptions of each sighting. I varied the locations, wearing the mask in the communal kitchen, back in the dusty storage room, on the small porch outside my door. Each time, without fail, at least one of the entities manifested. They favored proximity to solid objects, hugging corners or lingering near furniture, as if using the physical world for anchorage or cover. Intriguingly, they navigated space conventionally, never phasing through walls, yet remained utterly invisible to others. Sometimes they appeared solitary, sometimes in pairs. Once, near a banana tree behind the settlement, I counted 4 distinct, wavering forms. Each sighting brought a fresh wave of visceral fear, the tightness returning to my chest, a reaction that refused to diminish with repetition. Eating became difficult. Sleep offered little respite. I existed on a knife edge of anxiety, perpetually bracing for the moment I'd don the mask and find them staring back. I attempted to gather objective data amidst the terror. They lacked color, existing only as faint, refractive outlines against the ambient light. Their heights varied, some approximating my own, others shorter, a few notably taller. Limbs resembled human arms and legs, though their torsos seemed disproportionately narrow. Crucially, they emitted no sound. My ears detected no footfalls, no respiration, only the familiar sounds of the settlement or the silence of my room. I kept the mask hidden, fearing my increasingly erratic behavior would draw unwanted attention. A deeper worry gnawed at me. Perhaps these beings resented observation. Yet the anthropologist's drive, the relentless quest for understanding, spurred me onward. One afternoon, seeking solitude and perhaps a different context, I ventured beyond the settlement's perimeter to a clearing bordered by dense jungle. A cluster of weathered rocks offered shade. There I put on the mask, scanning the shadowed tree line. Minutes stretched. Then between 2 massive trunks draped in vines, a form glided into view. It paused, its indistinct head swiveling in my direction. A chill traced my scalp, my pulse hammered in my ears. Every instinct screamed flight, but I forced myself into absolute stillness. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the figure dissolved back into the dappled light. Gradually, unsettlingly, I began to perceive faint echoes of their presence even without the mask. Phantom pressures in the air, peripheral flickers that vanished when directly observed. A subtle, inexplicable shift in a breeze across my skin when standing in absolute stillness. A prickling awareness would crawl up my spine, prompting me to turn, always to find nothing. At odd moments, gooseflesh would erupt without cause. Each time these subtle intrusions occurred, a subsequent check with the mask confirmed it. One or more of them watching from a distance. They never communicated, never interacted physically, but their awareness was a palpable weight. Sleep remained a fraught battleground. One night, lying rigid in bed, the single lamp casting long shadows, my gaze fixed on the mask resting innocently on the table, I felt a desperate need for confrontation. Rising, I donned the artifact, then dimmed the light to a bare glow. The small room felt suffocatingly close, the air thick and warm. Sweat prickled my skin. For a moment, emptiness. Then, in the corner nearest the door, a solitary figure coalesced. It seemed inclined, poised slightly forward. A tingling numbness spread through my fingers. My mouth was utterly dry. I stood frozen for several heartbeats, watching it. Then it moved. 2 distinct steps brought it closer. A strangled cry escaped me. I nearly dropped the mask, my legs threatening to buckle. I tore the artifact from my face, breathing in ragged gasps. The corner, viewed with naked eyes, was empty. Sinking onto the cot, the mask clutched in trembling hands. A chilling realization dawned. They were not passive phenomena. They knew I could perceive them. And now they were testing the boundaries, probing my reactions. The thought of them standing mere feet away, unseen but present, sent a violent shiver through me. What was their purpose? A final, desperate attempt at objectification. My phone's camera. Holding the device, I filmed the room while peering through the mask, hoping against hope to capture some digital ghost, some shred of evidence. The screen displayed only the empty, dimly lit space. They remained invisible to the lens, existing physically yet beyond the spectrum of technological capture. The frustration was immense, deepening my isolation. The tension stretched taut, my nerves abraded raw. I startled awake nightly, drenched in sweat, convinced of an unseen presence hovering nearby. Sometimes a whisper of displaced air brushed my cheek, but the mask alone offered confirmation. Doubts assailed me. Was the mask itself altering my perception, inducing these experiences? I couldn't confide in anyone. The settlement elders remained courteously distant, their faces closing whenever I steered conversation toward unusual artifacts. One day, testing the waters, I casually mentioned finding a peculiar mask. The elder I addressed grew instantly grave. His eyes hardened. "If you have found something not meant for you, Elias," he advised, his voice low, "you should return it to its place." He offered no further explanation, turning abruptly and walking away. The implicit warning solidified my resolve. I had to leave. Packing swiftly, I journeyed to the nearest provincial town, securing lodging in a nondescript guest house. For one full day, I resisted the mask's pull, leaving it untouched in my bag. Sleep came easier, but the reprieve was short-lived. Curiosity, that relentless engine, reasserted itself. The following evening, I succumbed. Donning the mask in the unfamiliar room, my gaze swept upwards. There, pressed impossibly against the junction of wall and ceiling, was one of them. It clung there, an unnatural adhesion, seemingly observing me. My body went rigid. Seconds ticked by before I could react. Then, with fluid, unsettling grace, it slid downwards, disappearing behind a worn armchair. I removed the mask, hands shaking violently. It had followed me. My heart pounded with a new, sharper fear. On my final night in that region, I enacted a desperate measure. I placed the mask within a sturdy wooden crate bought for the purpose, cushioned it with other collected items, and sealed the lid tightly. A futile hope that containment might sever the connection. Yet even with the artifact hidden, the unnerving sensation of being watched persisted. Had they become attuned to me specifically? Was the mask's effect now somehow imprinted on my senses? I didn't know. It was enough. I booked passage home, back to the concrete anonymity of the city. The sealed crate traveled with me. I remained awake for most of the flight, trapped in a loop of replayed encounters, my eyes constantly scanning the rows, the aisle, the overhead bins. I never once considered opening the crate, never dared put the mask on. Still, every nerve remained on high alert. My apartment, a compact space overlooking city streets, felt both alien and achingly familiar. The crate found a home deep within my closet. I attempted immersion in routine, cooking simple meals, sorting mail, feigning normalcy. But the memory of those translucent figures was an indelible stain. Some nights I'd catch phantom movements in my peripheral vision. Occasionally, drawn by a morbid compulsion, I'd open the closet, stare at the sealed crate, and grapple with the urge to destroy the mask within. I never did. What good would it do? It has been some time since I last wore the mask. The thought remains a constant companion. I know with chilling certainty that if I were to lift that lid, take out the carved wood and place it over my face, I would see them, and they, undoubtedly, would see me. They might be in this room as I write, hovering near the bookshelf, silent auditors in my kitchen. A pervasive unease shadows my days, yet intertwined with it is the staggering, terrifying possibility that I have glimpsed something fundamental, a hidden layer of reality. Sharing this discovery feels impossible, inviting ridicule, perhaps even professional ruin. So, the secret festers. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself pressing my ear to the closet door, straining for any sound beyond my own measured breathing and the refrigerator's low hum. Their nature, their purpose, remains shrouded in mystery. All I know is their reality and their awareness of mine. For now, I exist in this altered state, attempting to reconcile the mundane with the monstrous knowledge I carry. Moments arise when the urge to retrieve the mask, to confront them directly, becomes almost overwhelming. But then I recall the vice-like grip on my chest that last time, the chilling implication of that figure stepping towards me. I am not ready for that escalation, not ready to discover what might happen if I hold their gaze too long. So the mask remains entombed in darkness, and I practice calming my racing heart whenever I enter a silent room. I tell myself nothing has harmed me, not yet, but every so often I sense that subtle shift in the atmosphere, that phantom pressure, and my eyes instinctively dart towards the corners, searching for shapes that remain unseen without that piece of haunted wood. My life is irrevocably changed. The veil has been thinned, and I cannot unsee what resides beyond. Peace feels like a forgotten language. The lock cylinder turned with a muted thud, and Silas nudged the motel room door open. Exhaustion, a heavy cloak woven from 14 hours of relentless highway, pressed him towards the promise of the sagging bed. He slapped the light switch. The room flared into existence under a sickly fluorescent glare, and instantly, something snagged his attention. A tiny, sharp point of light reflected in the corner of the tarnished mirror. He leaned closer, a chill blooming in his gut as recognition dawned. A camera lens, minute but undeniable. In that sickening instant, the weary traveler vanished. He was prey. This desolate roadside refuge, the Sleepy Hollow Motor Inn, was a meticulously crafted snare. Silas was my name then, a purveyor of goods crisscrossing territories, more familiar with the transient anonymity of motel rooms than his own apartment. 5-star suites, questionable flea bags where the patterned carpet seemed to writhe. He'd known them all. None had prepared him for this insidious violation. Miles had dissolved into a hypnotic blur, eyelids drooping, the world outside the windshield smudged by fatigue. The flickering vacancy sign of the Sleepy Hollow had emerged from the deepening twilight like a flawed beacon. Shabby, yes, bordering on derelict, but beggars adrift in the vast, empty stretches between towns learn not to be selective. The check-in should have raised alarms. The proprietor, a gaunt man named Barlow, perhaps 50, with eyes like chips of obsidian that never quite settled on Silas's own, exhibited an unnerving curiosity. How long would he be staying? Was anyone expecting his arrival? Just overnight, Silas had managed, the words thick with a stifled yawn. Gone by morning. Barlow had offered a slow nod, a peculiar half-smile etching itself onto his thin lips as he slid the room key across the counter. "Rest easy," he'd murmured, the tone somehow both solicitous and predatory. A shiver, dismissed then as fatigue, now echoed with dreadful significance. Staring at the malevolent eye embedded in the mirror, Barlow's parting words twisted into a threat. Silas's thoughts fragmented, racing. A sordid, voyeuristic enterprise? Or something darker, something that didn't bear contemplation? He forced a ragged breath, willing his mind to clarity. One camera meant others. He had to locate them, understand the scope of this trap before plotting an escape. He began methodically in the bathroom, probing every fixture, every seam. Predictably, another lens winked back, disguised as an unexceptional screw head within the shower nozzle. His skin crawled, imagining the unseen audience, the violation of countless unsuspecting guests. Back in the main room, the grim inventory continued, one secreted within the television remote, another nestled beside the glowing digits of the bedside alarm clock. Each discovery felt like a physical trespass, stripping away layers of assumed sanctuary, leaving him utterly exposed. He sank onto the dubious quilt covering the bed, head dropping into his hands. What now? Staying was unthinkable. But midnight had passed. The nearest town was a distant rumor on a map, and Barlow. What would Barlow do if he knew his secret stage had been discovered? As if summoned by the thought, his mobile phone vibrated sharply against his thigh. A text message bloomed on the screen, sender unknown. Settling in okay? A glacial coldness spread through him. They knew. He hadn't even touched the cameras. His thumb hovered over the keypad when a second message arrived. No need to call out. Nobody listens way out here. Just make yourself comfortable. Panic, raw and suffocating, surged. He had to leave. Now. He snatched his duffel bag, abandoning the few toiletries he'd unpacked. Hand reaching for the deadbolt, a fresh wave of fear washed over him. Were they waiting just outside? Heart hammering against his ribs, he pressed his eye to the peephole's distorting lens. The parking lot lay under the desolate wash of sputtering sodium lamps, seemingly deserted. Drawing a shaky breath, he twisted the knob and pulled the door open. The night air struck like a physical blow, shockingly cold against his flushed skin. He made a desperate, stumbling line for his sedan, keys fumbling in his trembling grasp. Just as his fingers closed around the door handle, he heard the scrape of a shoe on gravel behind him. "Checking out already?" Barlow's voice oily and thick with amusement. Silas froze. But the performance is just getting interesting. Slowly, Silas turned. Barlow stood silhouetted against the motel office light, no longer alone. Two broad, menacing figures flanked him, their expressions mirroring Barlow's predatory grin. Horror spiked as Silas saw the tablet clutched in the proprietor's hand, its screen alive with multiple glowing rectangles, live feeds from the very room he'd just fled. What is it you want?" The words were a strangled whisper. Barlow's grin stretched wider, predatory. "Oh, nothing much. Just for you to extend your visit. We have such engaging plans." In that fractured second, primal instinct roared to life. With a guttural yell, Silas hurled his duffel bag. It struck Barlow square in the chest, sending the slider man staggering back with a grunt. Seizing the moment of chaos, Silas dove into his car, hands shaking violently as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine caught with a desperate cough, then roared, just as one of the burly figures reached the driver's side window, thick fingers scrabbling at the glass. He slammed the gear shift into reverse. Tires screamed in protest on the cracked asphalt as he peeled out of the parking space, the vehicle fishtailing wildly. In the rearview mirror, a frantic tableau, the three figures scrambling towards a hulking pickup truck. He hit the two-lane highway pushing 80, the thrumming of his own pulse deafening in his ears. Destination unknown, direction irrelevant, only distance mattered, putting miles, states if necessary, between himself and the Sleepy Hollow Motor Inn. For an hour he drove like a man possessed, eyes darting constantly to the mirror, scanning for headlights, for pursuit. Gradually, the fierce burn of adrenaline subsided, leaving behind a residue of tremors and bone-deep exhaustion. He finally risked pulling off at a brightly lit, bustling truck stop, the fluorescent glare and presence of others offering a fragile shield of safety. Sitting there, the engine ticking cool, the events replayed in horrifying clarity, a chilling thought surfaced. How many others? How many hadn't noticed the glint in the mirror, hadn't felt the subtle wrongness, hadn't escaped? With hands that still shook, he dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was an anchor as he recounted the night's terror, the promise of officers dispatched to investigate, offering little immediate comfort. Hanging up, the dread remained. Barlow had his details from the check-in ledger. Name, license plate. What if they came looking? He spent the remainder of the night locked in his car. Sleep an impossibility. Dawn painted the sky in bruised colors as he drove to the nearest county sheriff's office, repeating his story, offering a formal statement. The deputies listened, offered sympathetic nods, but skepticism lingered in their eyes. His word against theirs, with no tangible proof retrieved from the room. The weeks that followed were lived under a pall of anxiety. Every unexpected phone call, every email notification sent jolts of fear through him. He braced himself for blackmail, for the sudden appearance of those violating images online, for a demand he couldn't meet. But silence stretched. Days bled into weeks and nothing happened. Perhaps the police inquiry, however tentative, had spooked them. Perhaps they'd simply moved on, ensnaring new victims. Slowly, cautiously, he began to breathe again. The ordeal left indelible marks. Hypervigilance became his default state. Hotel rooms transformed into potential surveillance grids. Every reflection suspect, every shadow potentially concealing a lens. The open road lost its allure. The constant travel, the nights spent in unfamiliar beds, became unbearable. He found different work, closer to home. Months later, the phone rang. It was the lead detective. Persistence, combined with other fragmented reports perhaps, had finally yielded enough for a warrant. The raid on the Sleepy Hollow Motor Inn had uncovered an operation far more extensive and horrifying than initially suspected. Years of systematic violation, hundreds of victims cataloged, their most private moments recorded and archived. Barlow and his accomplices were in custody, facing a litany of charges. The machinery of justice, slow and grinding, had finally caught up. Relief washed over Silas, sharp and cleansing, quickly followed by a renewed surge of anger for the countless violated souls. And beneath it all, the fear, now a dull ache rather than a sharp stab, but present nonetheless. The nightmare had ended, but its phantom limb would likely remain. In the years since, Silas worked deliberately to rebuild his sense of security, brick by painstaking brick. Therapy helped unravel the knots of trauma. The unwavering belief of friends anchored him when official channels seemed dismissive. He found a new, unexpected purpose, becoming a quiet advocate for privacy protections, for stricter oversight in an industry built on transient trust. Sometimes in the dead quiet of the night, his eyes still instinctively scanned the corners of his own bedroom, his heart kicking at a stray reflection. But then comes the counter-thought, the anchor. He survived. He saw the trap and broke free. He spoke out. The darkness revealed itself, stark and terrifying, but it also illuminated an inner reservoir of strength he hadn't known existed. Sitting now in the carefully secured sanctuary of his own home, he acknowledges the scars. They are part of his narrative, but they do not define its entirety. He is a survivor, tempered by the ordeal. If recounting his terror could shield even one other person from that predatory gaze, then meaning could be salvaged from the violation. The world holds hidden dangers, yes, insidious intentions lurking behind welcoming facades. But it also holds courage, the fierce resilience of those who refuse to be silenced, and the slow, inevitable creep of justice. And ultimately, that is where Silas chooses to fix his gaze, not on the fear that was, but on the strength discovered, not on the violation endured, but on the warrior who emerged. Because even when swallowed by darkness, the knowledge that we are more formidable than our fears, more resilient than our traumas, fuels the enduring fight to reclaim the light.